Just for 1 minute, I would like to recognize somebody who is in the audience with us this morning, and that's Dr. Michael Knox. And he's sitting right over here, and Dr. Knox has been so helpful in making us aware, making UAPB aware of this opportunity. Dr. Knox is working with the CDC to allow funding for programs like this on campuses across the state of Arkansas. And his official title here is the Branch Chief for Health Preparedness and Emergency Response for the Arkansas Department of Health. So we have just a little certificate that we wanted to present to Dr. Knox for his leadership in this event. So, if you would. Okay, so next on the program, is a presentation from Mr. Jimmy Mcgill, and I'm sure he'll be much more capable to tell you about himself than we are, but we do want to give you a little bit of an introduction, and to do that is another of the graduate students in the Addiction Studies program, Ms. Katrina Mason.
Despite a lifetime of incarceration and 23 years of drug addiction, Jimmy Mcgill was able to find and sustain long-term recovery. Jimmy now works as the State Opioid Response Coordinator for the Arkansas State Drug Director's Office. He is a certified peer recovery specialist through both the IC and RC and NAAD-AC, the Association for Addiction Professionals. He has led the development of peer recovery throughout the state of Arkansas. Jimmy is a trainer of trainers and assisted in the training of 280 peer recovery support specialists. Jimmy designed and developed the Peers Achieving Collaborative Treatment Program, also known as the PAC Project, allowing Arkansas to place peers in the Division of Youth Services, emergency rooms, drug courts, jails, reentry centers, and community service centers. He spearheaded the development working group that created the Arkansas model of peer recovery, which has now gained national attention. Jimmy assisted the Appalachian Consulting Group in developing a prison peer recovery program for North Dakota. He and his wife are the founders of Next Step Women, a nonprofit recovery foundation that houses women in recovery, assisting them with employment and everyday life skills. Jimmy was the founding member and chairman for the Arkansas Peer Achieving Recovery Together Coalition APART. He is an active member of SAMHSA Regional 6 Advisory Board. He is a known keynote speaker and advocate for reentry and recovery, constantly fighting against the stigma of addiction. Let's give him a warm welcome, Mr. Jimmy Mcgill.
So I want to thank you guys for allowing me to come out and share my recovery with you. My name is Jimmy Mcgill, and I'm a person in long-term recovery. And what that looks like to me is that I haven't put a drug, alcohol, or chemical in my body in 4 years, 8 months, and 12 days. And so I can't always say that, and if you paid attention to my bio, then you know I've spent the majority of my life in and out of prison. I've been to Pine Bluff a number of times because this is where the training school and the diagnostic unit is. And so, unfortunately, I went down a very colorful road to get where I'm at today. And I've got a really good life today, you know. And what I want to talk to you about is a lot of stuff, you know, but I'll try to keep it entertaining and I'll try to keep it as engaged as possible. The reason I share my recovery is because the more we talk about addiction, the more we talk about the solution, the more we humanize it, then the more we destigmatize addiction, right? And recovery is the solution. And stigma is, let's call it what it is. It's discrimination. It's picking and choosing who has the right to live and die. And people are afraid to talk about recovery because of the stigma that is associated with it. And that's why I come, and that's why I do what I do. My story is not unique. There are 23 million people in America in long-term recovery. 10,000 to 12,000 of those long-term recovering people are in the state of Arkansas. I know a vast number of those people, so there's nothing special about my addiction, right? But there are some circumstances surrounding my recovery that are very unique. Now, if you think taking a drug and putting that chemical inside your body is going to take away any pain, any shame, any guilt, any sadness, any loneliness, any hurt, you are absolutely correct. It will. But it's also going to take your house, your car, your wife, your kids, your money. You're going to have to borrow some of that. And then you're going to spend it on the same chemical, right? It is pure insanity for me to think that I can take something outside of Jimmy, put it inside Jimmy, and change the circumstances surrounding me. That is insanity, right? And that's exactly what I tried to do. The drugs were my solution. I'm the third generation of an addict, right? Like my father suffered from the disease of addiction. My grandfather died from alcoholism, which is simply addiction to alcohol. So as far back as I can remember, I was brought up in the atmosphere of addiction and violence and just negative activity, criminal thinking, just a typical stereotype environment of a drug addict. That's what I knew. My father did the absolute best that he could with me, but his love was for a drug. And so his lifestyle surrounded the same as mine later on did, getting, finding, and using a way and a means to get more drugs, right? Like all that matters to the person that's caught in the grip of addiction is waking up and getting what I need to get me going. That's it. It wasn't that I didn't want to love my daughter. It wasn't that my father didn't want to love me. I loved her the best that I could, but my devotion was to a chemical, and nothing that anyone could say mattered. There was no reasoning with me. There was no beating me, no locking me up, no talking to me till you blew in the face. None of that mattered. The only thing that mattered was getting the driving force of my life and putting it inside me. See, I was a victim of sexual abuse by a man as I was growing up. Not my father. My father was in prison when this occurred. But at 9 years old, my mother left me with a male babysitter. Understand, my molester didn't have horns. He didn't have a devil's tail. He didn't force me. I was so desperate for the attention of a male because my father's attention went to a chemical. I was so willing when he suggested that I do things because he was showing me the attention that I didn't get growing up. See, the first drug I used was people. It wasn't a chemical. I was willing to do whatever made you happy so that you would like me, and that changed the way I felt. And anytime we put a chemical in our body, we're doing it for one reason, to change the way I feel. That's it. I became an active gang member when I was 14 years old because it changed the way I felt. For the first time in my life, I was surrounded by a group of people who had a very similar situation, and they made me feel better about me. I spent my life in and out of prisons. At 18 years old, I was in Varner. I'd been convicted of gang activity, and I was arrested for criminal misuse of a prohibited weapon. And my life didn't stop there. It just got worse, right? So I'm trying to escape the humiliation of sexual abuse, the neglect from my father. And of course, I got smacked around some as a kid. My mother told me she was going to the store and she never came back, because my father was so abusive. And so in an attempt to flee her, I was left alone. So you see, I've got all these childhood traumas that I'm trying to escape. And the first time I put a drug in my body, it made everything okay. Everything was better. I found a solution that worked for me. Now, I smoked and drank the same pot that a lot of you guys drank in high school, right? College, I get it. The difference was I was unable to stop. Okay, at 7 in the morning when everybody else is getting up, prepping to get ready to go to class, I'm in the back of the room dumping the bottle. I'm looking for one more drink, scrolling through the ashtrays looking for a blunt roach. Like I could not stop. See, the choice in the matter for me was I chose to use initially. Had I known that I would stay in the grip of addiction for 23 years, catch hepatitis C, go to prison 6 times, I promise you I would have never put the chemical in my body. I didn't know I was going to get drugged through the mud like that. I was trying to change how I felt. That dope took away the shame, the humiliation, the guilt, the sadness, the hurt, the loneliness. It didn't matter if the people liked me anymore because I liked me. I was good and high. I felt good about Jimmy. I used for 23 years. The dope stopped working a long time ago when I was chasing a dream. See, I used until the pain of staying the same outweighed the pleasure, or the pleasure of staying the same outweighed the fear of change, right? When the pain outweighed my pleasure, I was willing to do something different. See, the dope was my solution until my solution became my biggest problem. In 2015, I walked out of prison for the last time. For the first time in my life, something different happened. My environment changed. Okay? And so now that we've talked about the problem, let's get into the solution. What worked was something that I'd never tried. Okay, housing is so important to recovery. If we want to change what's going on in our state, then we've got to put some resources out there for people like me to get them. Okay, when I walked out of prison in 2015, if you would have told me that I was going home to become the first parolee to work for the governor of Arkansas, I would have thought, oh, y'all was high. I had no idea what was in store for me. And there is absolutely no limit when it comes to recovery. Recovery is the solution. Addiction is the problem. I went to a new environment of like-minded people, and I found an identification process. See, it's hard to stay clean when your environment admires dirt. I can't leave the infirmary and go to a place that's going to get me sick. And for years, that had been what I did. I always returned. See, we got a problem when the treatment centers are sending the person back out into the same atmosphere. Okay? The treatment works. It is effective. 30 days will lift the fog off of my mind. But what comes next? Let me tell you what comes next. 30 days after treatment, life comes. And if you don't teach the person in addiction how to face and fix life's problems, then we're going to do what we always do to escape those problems. Because all I know is getting and finding a way and a means to get more. No one taught me that I had an inability to accept personal responsibility. Okay? I had 4 years clean. And the state drug director was having to meet me in the parking lot to teach me how to tie my tie before I spoke. True story. I didn't know how to be a dad. I didn't know how to deal with life's problems. And facing and solving problems is key to recovery. Okay, if you don't send someone home after treatment with a support system, then we're setting them up for failure. I need somebody to take me, walk with me, and teach me how to live without using the same way somebody taught me how to put one in me. Who better to do that than someone in recovery? And that's what it was. I went to a place that was not a treatment center. It was a chem-free. I was given a curfew, and they told me I had to get a job. And I had 17 felony convictions, so you should have seen me trying to get a job. It was not working out. I couldn't get temporary services to hire me. And so what do you guys think ran through my mind when the person who was over the residential part of the recovery place I was at said, Jimmy, you got to pay rent. You're $400 or $500 behind. What would have happened had I not been around healthy people in recovery? I would have done the only thing I ever knew. I would have cooked up some scheme, thought if I went and got a bag, I could sell it, then be back in the house by curfew. And that never worked out before, right? I'm such a good criminal, right? So today, I'm able to make good choices, and I'm able to use that experience to help other people make good choices. But it took a long time to get there, right? Like, that's what I mean when I say someone has to teach me how to be responsible. I didn't know how to be a dad. One of the first decisions I tried to make was Christmas on my first year clean. I was going to buy my son a pocket knife. He was 7. No, he was 6. And I was like, well, I think I'll get him this knife. And that would have been a terrible thing, right? Like, it's just the small stuff. Today life is really amazing. I know how to live clean today. Is it easy? No, ma'am. It never has been. I've been able to accomplish some amazing things. Resources were given to me that were never given to me before. People bought into the concept of Jimmy. The fact that someone with a history as extensive as mine could do the good stuff that I was doing changed a lot of perceptions. There's nothing special about me. There are people trying to get clean every day in recovery that just don't have those resources. 426 Arkansas people died last year from an overdose. I promise you, a lot of those people sought out help before they died. If we don't make the resources available, we're not doing nothing. If we don't increase the drop-in centers, we need recovery centers. We need recovery specialists. We need Kim-free houses. We need recovery residences where someone can go regardless of insurance, regardless of how much money you don't have, and get what you need to live clean. Because if we don't, we're going to keep filling the graveyards up. Arkansas is leading right now for recovery efforts throughout the state, and that's scary. Throughout the nation. I'm proud of that. I'm proud that we have gained national attention for what we're doing with recovery. We've been able to take a recovery specialist, that's someone just like me, right? That's somebody with 2 years in recovery or more. And then we train them, and it's called peer recovery. And the reason peer recovery works so successfully is because it's an identification process. There were a whole lot of people who tried to reach me. Whole lot of preachers, whole lot of teachers, whole lot of counselors, whole lot of therapists, whole lot of prison people. Like, they invested. They tried to talk to me. I was not willing to let them do their job. I shut down. I didn't want to hear what they had to say. I didn't trust them. It was an addict who I identified with. And that's the beauty of peer recovery, right? Like, when I share with you my recovery, that I've been down this road, this is what I did, I understand what you're going through, all of a sudden you identify me and you're willing to share honestly with me. And that's what it is. Recovery is an identification process. It's the same thing when I was in the street, right? Like, I knew who was cool and who wasn't. That's why I didn't buy dope from the police. I looked at you, I judged you, and I identified with you. I can either mess with you or I can't. It's the same thing with recovery. See, I'm willing to tell you that I broke in my mom's house and stole all of her jewelry to go get high. But if I would have told that to my counselor, I would have felt like he would have judged me. If I would have told that to my preacher, I felt like he would have lectured me and then started praying over me. I needed somebody who was not going to judge me, who was going to say, boy, you're in the right place. I get it. I did that too. And it gets easier. We can work through that. Life is good today because of recovery. I've been able to become a homeowner. My wife and I just bought our first house. I've been on, thank you. I have been on parole since I was 18 years old. I'm 43. About 2 months ago, I saw my parole officer for the last time because of recovery. Because of recovery, I've been able to fly all over the United States of America and share my story. I've been able to stand in front of thousands of people, from the Attorney General to the White House staff in D.C. We went up there for the recovery leadership. We met with legislation. We've changed the state law in Arkansas, allowing people with a criminal history to work as recovery specialists in the state. You know, we've been able to place people that have sustained recovery thanks to the Department of Health and partnership inside the emergency rooms. So when the addict wakes up from an overdose, there's someone in there who's also a survivor of overdose and says, hey, bro, I'm not here to judge you. I remember the last time I was in that same bed, and I'd like to hang out and talk with you. And that's a beautiful thing. We've been able to place recovery specialists inside the jails. Okay, someone like me who has successfully re-entered society, but I tried and failed 5 times, so I know what worked and what didn't. That program we have at Lonoke County Jail is at a 75% success rate. Okay, that's 75% of people that will not go home and re-offend, that will not break in your car to go get high, will not commit a crime. I haven't committed a crime since I got in recovery. It's amazing the way the police left me alone. And I've been thinking they were the problem. We created what is called the Arkansas model of peer recovery. Peer recovery is an evidence-based, I'm talking extremely effective, and has been studied by a number of states. Texas just released a 2-year evaluation. 84% of the people who were engaged in peer recovery stopped using or decreased use. 84%. That's astronomical, right? Like it feels funny saying it because it almost feels like that can't be right. 84%. But I spend every day of my life in recovery, so I see what it really looks like, And Arkansas has jumped in front of Texas. We've jumped in front of Louisiana. We've jumped in front of all these other states in what we've done. One of the things we're currently doing with peer recovery is we're placing peer recovery specialists as a part of the drug task force, so that when the person gets arrested, instead of putting them back in the criminal justice system, that peer can go meet with them in the holding cell and say, hey, listen, I can get you into treatment if you want to go into treatment, and then we can talk about housing. And then the following morning when they go to court for their first appearance, that recovery specialist can go with them and say, Your Honor, I've got a treatment center willing to take him. I've got all the paperwork done. If you will commit him, I'll drive him over there right now. And in turn, we've introduced a solution versus a recidivism rate. No other state has done what we're doing, and it's because we've got leadership that believes in recovery. And I can prove it, okay? So about 15 years ago, I'm doing what any good drug addict would do, and I'm breaking in a house. Yeah, it's sad, but I'm going to be transparent and honest with you. And there was this stack of DVDs, right? And so I'm taking these DVDs and I'm going to go sell them at Hastings for $2 a DVD. And so I've got them, and I go in and I set these DVDs up here, and the guy's looking through them. They're Japanimation, right? So they're these Japan cartoon type DVDs. They're really rare, and I had no idea how rare they were until I'd already given them my ID, and it came out to the amount. They didn't have enough in the cash register and had to call for the manager to sign off on it. So I was like, okay, I'm going to get good and high, Paula. So I hand him my ID, and the guy comes over, the manager, and he's looking through, and he says, hey, I've got that movie. And I said, yeah, that's good. And he looked at the next one, and he said, wait a minute, I got that one too. I told you they're a rare collection. So he's flipping through there, and he says, sir, where did you get these? I've got all of these. I said, they're mine. He said, no, I'm serious. Where'd you get these? And I said, "Man, will you please give me my money?" He said, "Hang on, I've got to call my house." I had done robbed that man's house and took him his stuff to sell it. Okay? 2 months later, the captain of the Pulaski County CID, Kirk Lane, pulled up and arrested me. You just heard him speak a while ago as our state drug director. Put the handcuffs on me, hauled me to jail. I went and I did 7 years. I got a 7-year sentence for that. I served my time. I'm done with that one. But while I was on parole, Kirk Lane pulled up with his narcotics division a couple of years later and arrested me for drugs. Threw me in the back of his car, drove my car away, and sentenced me for a drug possession charge. So the point I'm trying to make is our state drug director arrested me a number of times throughout my addiction. I often joke and say I followed his career since he was a patrolman, just from the back seat of the cop car. When the governor signed off on me, it was because Director Lane knew the value of recovery. We were speaking at the state capitol for the International Overdose Awareness Day about 3 years ago, and he did not even recognize me. Now, I recognized him because he was the devil to me, right? Like, he was the person that I knew when I saw him, he was going to take my bag of dope away and put me in jail, and I hated him. I remember sitting in prison and somebody saying, "Jimmy, what happened? Why are you back?" And I remember saying, "Kirk Lane." It was always Kirk Lane's fault. Because blaming and rationalization and justifying is all a part of addiction, right? As long as I had someone to blame or compare myself to, I was never an addict. See, I was never an addict because as long as someone was worse than I was, they had it, not me. When I smoked pot, it was okay because I was just smoking. And as long as I just smoked and didn't snort or pop pills, I was okay. And then I took a drink and a puff, and the next thing you know, somebody said, "Well, here, try one of these." So I swallowed that, And, I still don't need help because I'm just drinking, smoking, and popping pills. At least I'm not snorting. And so, when I snorted, it was okay because I wasn't smoking out the pipe, right? Until the powder went in the pipe and I started smoking it. And so now I'm doing all this, but it's okay because I don't shoot dope, right? Until I did shoot dope. Well, that's okay, Paula, because I'm not going to use a dirty syringe. But then I caught hepatitis from a dirty syringe. And it just goes on and on and on, right? As long as I had somebody to blame or compare myself to, I never needed help because I wasn't an addict. You was. And I ain't as bad as you because you smoke in front of the kids. Anyway, back to the story. He literally did not recognize me because of recovery. Like, the change had been so transformative, right? Like, he had no idea that it was me until I got on the microphone and started cracking jokes about it. And all of a sudden the light bulb went off. And from there, we started traveling around to the schools and the colleges, sharing recovery and a story of hope, right? Trying to inspire people. See, those 6 trips to prison and all that stuff I went through, that was on-the-job training for me to be able to do something spectacular today. And so if you guys want any information, you can always, one of the ways I share my recovery is I'm very public, and I have a Facebook page, and if you search Jimmy Mcgill Live, it'll take you to it. I'm in a suit with some glasses on. And you can always send me questions. If you need help getting someone in treatment, I will jump at that. Whatever close resource to whatever your area is, I want to help. If you have someone you want to get trained as a peer recovery specialist, I want to help. Right? Like, nobody else has to die. Any addict can lose the desire to use and find a new way to live, and I am proof of that. And so if you guys have any questions, I would love to answer them. No, everybody fixed? Yes, ma'am?
So even with your resources and the help, so what do you think, change your mindset to actually want to do it, just looking at all the years that you had done it? I definitely know it had to be be a mindset and a mind change. So what do you think got you to that point to actually hold on to the resources, walk with the resources, and hang with the person who was really wanting to hang with you and help you?
My environment. It was all the environment. For the first time ever, I saw recovery as fun. Like, I didn't want to get clean because I thought this was going to suck. You know, my idea of fun was being stuck in the same bedroom for 10 hours peeping out the window blinds. That was living life to me. I had no idea that I could go to the lake and I could spend time with my kids and take them shopping. I had no idea what a normal life was until I was introduced to it. I had to get in an environment of like-minded people for that to happen. Once I realized and got a taste of what you guys live every day, there was no looking back.
Obviously, the addiction didn't stop when you went to prison.
No, sir.
Did you get any treatment in prison?
No, sir.
Is there any available for you? And do you have any comments about the availability of treatment needs in prison?
Yeah, so there's not. The closest thing to prison treatment you've got is SATP. And they don't really dig into the addiction concept of addiction, right? The disease concept, right? Like they tell you all this stuff, or they did me. They told me what I did wrong, of course, which I know now what my choices were. But they didn't teach me that the disease would manifest itself in a variety of ways. See, once the drugs were gone, my behavior was there, okay? And I can change how I felt with a lot of things. It doesn't have to be a drug. I can physically change my feelings with sex. You know, I can eat. A lot of you guys know about binge eating. You know, when we don't feel good, we eat. Or Netflix. I can obsess. All addiction is mental and obsessive. You know, we're talking about a mental obsession and a physical compulsion that makes up all addiction, and nothing in prison ever taught me that. It wasn't until after that when I got introduced to recovery.
I have another question.
Yes, ma'am.
Being that you are the third generation of abuse and misuse, you know, some people may be, okay, well, it's been in my family, I won't dare do it. What do you think led you to that, even seeing what your dad, your granddad did to? What led you to doing it and not saying, because I know what it is and saw it, I'm not going to do it?
So my initial use was at an age too young for me to think about consequences. You know, and that's just the truth of it. I did whatever the other kids were doing because I wanted to be accepted. And as I worked through a process of recovery, I was able to tie that back to childhood events. Like, that's the reason I always needed enough dope for not just me to get high, but for you to get high too, so that you would want to be around me. Because there was a void that I was left with as a child. Any more? Yes, sir.
In your opinion, what do you think is the percentage of getting drugs through prescriptions compared to getting it from outside?
So, one more time.
Like, in the first talk, we heard like a lot of drugs are being, they get them from prescriptions, right?
Yes.
From doctors. So, in your opinion, was that possible, or did you get it from outside sources?
So mine didn't start with prescription, right? But there are people in my life that did. My best friend actually just got his 4-year recovery tag last night, and he was a Catholic schoolboy in Little Rock, varsity football, all that good stuff. He hurt his shoulder and was prescribed. Another good friend of mine, Ryan Hampton, who is the author of American Fix, and he is all over the news all the time. His addiction started with a prescription. There are a lot of people in my everyday life who did begin through a doctor. Yeah.
One other question. So, other than peer recovery specialists, which
Yes, sir.
people who recover, you train them for those kinds of jobs, what other options are there for people who recover?
So most of us, we do get to a point to where, are we talking employment?
Yes.
Yeah. So it's very hard for someone with a past to find employment. I couldn't even get a job mowing the grass. They were afraid I'd steal the grass after I cut it, you know. and I apply it everywhere, temporary services, everything. Sometimes a person has multiple theft charges and nobody wants to hire somebody who's known for stealing. I'm not going to let you work at my cash register. We can say that we're not judgmental, but that's just not true. We're lying to ourselves when we say it. And most people in recovery find some kind of career gravitating around recovery, whether it's a treatment center, whether it's, and we know people. Once you've got 5 or 6 or 7 years clean, you know, we're very intellectual people. We start our businesses, we get LCCs, and most people I know in recovery with multiple years clean are homeowners, business owners. You know, I know someone running for circuit judge now who's in long-term recovery. You know, once we get clean and get a foundation built, there's no holds barred. There's no telling what we can and can't do. But in the beginning, it is extremely hard and it is very limited. You know, and that's why the circle we're around is so important.
I heard you say that the void, I keep hearing that word void.
Yes, sir.
And when I think of it, and I know you mentioned about third generation and not having a family there. So is drugs like the family that you missed?
No, drugs just took away the feeling of missing my family.
Okay. I like that.
It's true. I liked it too. Is that it? All right. Thank you, guys.
To hear from you and to hear what you're doing and what's happening in the state is just a blessing to us. And thank you. And
Thank you very much.
Thank you for what you're doing for
Yes, ma'am.
everyone.
Thank you.
And just a little bit of a token for you as well.
Awesome.
All right.
Thank you.
Thank you. Well, we got to have the privilege, and that, you know, when someone is, and I'm sure you're aware, when someone tells their own personal story, that's really an honor. You know, to stand before others and tell of what their personal experiences have been with something as devastating as substance use, that's a privilege and an honor for us, you know. And we have another speaker who is going to do us that honor, but from another perspective, and that's the perspective of a family member who has been affected by their dear one's use of a substance. And so to introduce our next speaker, I will introduce to you Dr. Cheryl Jackson Golden. And speaking of privilege, I've been very privileged to be at UAPB since 2003. And that was the second year that the Addiction Studies program was in existence. So I've been here long enough to have the privilege to introduce my colleague, Dr. Golden, who was once my student in the Addiction Studies program. But now she has gone on to earn her PhD, and we work together now in the program. So to bring introductions of our next speaker, please welcome Dr. Golden.
Good morning. I have the honor of introducing our next speaker, Mrs. Paula Cunningham. Mrs. Cunningham is an RN and the manager of Medical Policy Administration at the Arkansas Blue Cross and Blue Shield, and she's been with that agency for over 10 years. She has experience in medical policy development and implementation. Previous experience include cardiovascular nursing and phase 1 through 5 of the clinical trial coordination in both pharmaceutical and medical device trials. Mrs. Cunningham has been personally affected by the opioid crisis, which claimed the life of her son, Parker. Parker had an accidental opiate-related overdose. Following her son's overdose, she became a passionate activist, using her voice to promote prevention, education, and support aimed at eliminating opiate-related overdose in Arkansas. In addition to receiving her registered nurse diploma from Baptist Health Nursing School in 1990, she also holds a certified professional coder certification from the American Academy of Professional Coders and received a biblical counseling certification from the Southwestern Baptist Theological Seminary in Fort Worth, Texas in 2018. Paula also serves on the speakers for Speak Up About Drugs and Next Step Women. Mrs. Cunningham.
Jimmy is a hard act to follow. The other thing is Jimmy is usually there cheering me on and making me feel good, like I'm doing something good. So if there's anybody in here that can be a cheerleader every now and then, I'm going to need somebody. I'm not a public speaker. That's not something I ever wanted to do, but apparently God had other plans. And so I find myself in a unique opportunity to share my story, and along with that, to do something good with it. And I share my story basically so that you'll know what it's like and what the impact that it has on someone's life as a family member. But I also share it to show that there is hope. There is hope even after losing someone. And then I share it just to hopefully make a difference and change. So this microphone, hang on, I'll get it. Can everybody hear me okay with it right there? Good? Okay. So today I'm going to start with, basically I'm going to tell Parker's story, but I'm also going to talk about stigma and the effects of stigma, the fact that addiction is a disease. I want to talk about medication-assisted recovery or medication-assisted treatment. Kirk Lane mentioned that earlier. And then talk about some what-ifs. This airplane right here, this is a Boeing 737. This is what Kirk Lane was talking about earlier. I heard Kirk Lane tell this a year or so ago. Why do I still use it? I still use this scenario because it's still pertinent. It's still very much real. This plane is crashing every day in the United States still. And in August 29th of 2018, it crashed with my son in it, Parker Allen Gill. That was my son. He passed away about a year ago from an opioid-related overdose. Parker, he hated that picture, and I'm so glad that I have it now. He was my little angel. And someone in here said earlier, I think it was over here at this table, about if seeing other family members go through it, what didn't make you say, oh, I'll never do it because I saw. I think that was you back there. Parker was my son that I thought never would touch a drug. He had seen other family members go through this and struggle and saw the impact. And he said, I will never do drugs, Mom. I remember him telling me that because he saw how horrible it was. He had a tender heart. He had a big heart. He was very loving. If he was in here in the room today, you would all laugh at him over some crazy joke he would crack, but he would relate to each and every one of you here. He would want to get to know you, and that's how Parker was. He did all the normal things that other kids did. He played baseball. He competed in archery. He played football. He was not good in football. He hated it. He was little. He actually got bullied when he was younger because he grew up to be over 6 feet tall, but when he was younger, he was shorter and thin. And I just want to share this story real quick because I think it's cool. One day, we were in Walmart, and he said, Mom, I need to get some boots. And I said, or he wanted to look at them, so we went and looked at them, and he said, I want those boots. I said, Parker, those are steel toe boots. You don't need steel-toe boots. He said, no, I do. And I said, I'm not buying you steel-toe boots. He said, okay. We went home. About a month later, we were in Walmart, and he's like, Mom, we need to go look at the boots again. And I said, why? And he said, we just do. He got the boots. He tried them on. He said, I'm getting these boots. I said, Parker, I told you I'm not buying you steel-toe boots. He was probably in the 3rd or 4th grade. I think 4th grade, but he had a big foot. And he said, I know. I saved up my money, and I'm buying these boots. I said, okay. Next morning, he's getting ready for school, and he walks out. I'm like, Parker, you've got your boots on. Those are steel-toe boots. They're going to hurt your feet. No, I'm going to wear them. He was so proud of them. I'm going to wear them. Okay, picked him up from school. How's the day today? He said, today was great, Mom. I'm like, what? He's like, I got to play football. I said, you got to play football? Do you not get to play football? He's like, no, I never get to play football. They tell me I can't play football. And the big guys, they're going to beat me up if I do. But today, I said, I want to play football. And they're like, no. And he said, I hauled off and I kicked him in the shin. And I got to play football. And he was resourceful. But there's damage. Kids are mean, you know. But that damaged him. And the bullying that he got when he was a kid, he held on to. But he found his own way. He continued to get to play football, and I don't think the guy messed with him anymore over that, but I liked that. He also was an amazing duck caller. My preacher says he could blow a duck call like nobody's business. He competed in the World's Championship duck calling contest in Stuttgart. He started that when he was really young and was really, really good at it, just like he was archery. And at some point, he just stopped. I didn't realize what was going on at the time, but it was because the drugs became more important than his duck calling and his archery. And he also graduated high school like other kids do. But when Parker graduated high school, he had already completed 90 days in a residential treatment program for his opioid use disorder. It started very young for him. He told me, and it's just really hard for me to believe, but when he was in treatment at one point, he told me the first time he ever took a drug, he was 10 years old. As a mom, that breaks my heart because I didn't know. But he also suffered some abuse when he was younger. We talk about the adverse childhood experiences and how that makes an impact. I learned that he was bullied and that he also had some abuse when he was younger that I never knew about. But Parker tried hard. Parker tried hard to overcome his disease. He tried several different residential treatment programs. He tried medication-assisted treatment, intensive outpatient treatment. After this graduation, he was doing well. He was a very hard worker. He got a job after high school. He didn't go to college, of course. He had been in residential treatment for his high school, most of his high school year, and he just needed to stay in his program with his sponsors and everything and did not go to college, but he started working, and he had a lot of money. He was doing well, and of course, with a lot of money in his pocket, a craving hit, and he relapsed, and so he started using, and that was kind of a cycle for him. He would get well, he would do better. I shouldn't say get well. That's not appropriate. He would do better and get into a short-term recovery, start living life, have money, and then he would relapse. And that, like I said, that was a cycle for him. At one point, he relapsed, he used, and he overdosed, and they took him to the ER, his friends, and they gave him Narcan, and he survived that, and he drove home from the ER. His truck was there, and he drove from the ER, and he said, Mom, I overdosed. He said, I got to go back to treatment to figure out what I need to do because I'm not going to survive this if I don't. And I saw him, and he was just crying like a baby. 6 foot tall young man crying like a child. And I saw him bent over, just heavy with the weight of his disease and all the shame and the guilt that people had heaped on him, but that he also heaped on himself. I saw fear. He was terrified he wasn't going to make it, and he wanted nothing more than to figure out how to live without using drugs. And it's just as much as he wanted to live without using drugs, at the same time his body was wanting the drug just as bad. It was horrible for him, and it was horrible for me to watch that, knowing that I couldn't change it for him, that nothing I did was going to change that. There were things that I could do that would be helpful and things that I could do that would be harmful, but I was not in control of his disease, and he was not in control of his disease. This is Parker when he was living in recovery housing and chem-free housing and in residential treatment program at different times when we would go out, maybe on pass. This is the Parker wanted to be. He was so excited about this person. He would say, "Mom, I'm on top of the world." We went in on one of these passes and somebody said, "Hey, how you doing?" He's like, "I'm doing great. I'm on top of the world." And he was just so excited to be without drugs and to be in recovery. And that's who he wanted to be. And that's what people don't understand about this disease. You see, stigma is rooted in the misconception that the person struggling with substance use disorder or addiction somehow has control over it and is therefore to blame, and that's wrong. And that's what I want to tell people wherever I go, that people with this disease are hurting. And this is a disease that they're suffering with. You see, you may make a choice the very first time to use. I don't know why Parker used that first time. I did find out that he went through his abuse when he was about 10, and then at some other point he told me the first time he used was 10. So putting two and two together, I think that like Jimmy, he was using that to be able to handle what a young child's mind couldn't handle at the time. And then later on, he was at some point given an oxy at a party. And that really made it all better. And then his body continued to need that. You see, addiction is not a bad habit. It's not a result of moral weakness and overindulgence. These are myths. These are all myths about addiction. Doesn't matter how much willpower you have. Someone used to tell him, "You just need to stop." No kidding. If Parker could have stopped, he would have. Another myth is that, well, so many people relapse, so treatment obviously doesn't work. And we know that's not true. After seeing Jimmy and so many other people that I've had the pleasure to get to know that have been through treatment and overcome this disease, we know that's not true. The facts are, addiction's a chronic, life-threatening condition just like atherosclerosis, diabetes, hypertension, and due to physical changes in the brain itself, people with a substance use disorder simply can't stop using, no matter how strong their inner resolve is, by themselves. They can't just say, "Okay, I'm going to quit today," and move on. But there is treatment, and people do recover. So, I like simple. I'm not going to go into a big ordeal about all of the different aspects of how addiction is a disease and how it affects your brain. But I did develop this slide because it kind of helped me after reading some of the studies on how it worked. It kind of helped me to understand a little bit more of what goes on and what was going on in my son when he would have these cravings and he would relapse. So our body has a natural survival mechanism that whenever we experience a pleasurable activity, dopamine is released in our body. So if we're walking, who likes Hertz donuts, or has anybody tried Hertz donuts? There's one now in Little Rock. Yes, I saw one the other day. It was a Cookie Monster. It was amazing, but they are the best. Anything like that. So when I eat that Hertz donut, I get some dopamine released. I do, and it feels good. You see, it also affects the reward center. It feels good. Naturally, that is a chemical in our body that's released to tell us to do something again. That's why when we eat, we want to eat again because we need to survive. When we introduce an opiate, cocaine, methamphetamine into our body, that's an unnatural mechanism, but it does the same thing. It affects these receptors that let out this explosion of dopamine. See the big red? So when my son would take an OxyContin, he would have this huge explosion of dopamine in his body, many more times than that Hertz donut, right? And it would tell him to do that again over and over and over at the expense of other healthy activities or consequences, right? And so what happens is the person using, they have these explosions of dopamine, they keep using, and the body says, hey, wait a minute, something's wrong here. There is too much dopamine going on, and we need to cut off some of these receptors so that when he would take that dopamine, not as much dopamine would be released. And at some point, if he did not use, he would have fewer receptors to release dopamine, and he would have fewer than, say, me. And at normal state, he would not feel normal. He would feel down. He would feel depressed. What's the fix to that? Put more drug, okay? There's also a compound called, or a chemical called glutamate that actually happens at that same time, and it makes your body remember, or makes your brain remember that that substance gave you that explosion of dopamine, and it felt really good. So I'm going to remember who I was with, where I was, all of the sights and sounds, because that was really good. I can remember where I had my first Hertz donut, right? I can remember where the Hertz donut store is. But, so even after a person stops using, so he would go to rehab, his treatment center, he would stop using and he'd be off. He would not have withdrawals anymore. He was learning a few things to help him deal with it. But then when he got out and had money, his brain was remembering, if you go get that oxy, I'm going to give you a dopamine release and you're going to feel good again. So he'd have a pocket full of money and he'd start feeling that something maybe happened relationally or whatever. He'd get a bad phone call and he'd get this craving and he would relapse. These are just pictures to show that we do have mechanism now to see this on PET scan and imaging. The picture here on the left, it shows the control, and then it shows the brain of the addicted, someone with addiction. The little red and the control, those are dopamine receptors. So you see the control brain has the red popping up that shows there's plenty of dopamine receptors. The other pictures, you can see there's not as much red there. So that's proof that a person with addiction does not, it has these effects. It's affecting their dopamine receptors, they're turning them off, and there's not as many. And in the other little set of pictures where there's 3 there, you have the healthy control with the red showing up good, dopamine receptors. And in the middle, that is a person with substance use disorder with 1 month's abstinent. You can still see there's really no red. And then in 14 months, you can see that the red's coming back. They're regenerating, or the dopamine receptors are being turned back on, or whatever. But the brain is healing, okay? So can be some healing in the brain after. But it takes a while to get to that place. And so what my son would do is he would get better, and then he would have his craving and relapse. He never got to that long-term sustained recovery because the cravings of the opioids were so severe. He started with OxyContin, and then he began smoking OxyContin. And then, of course, that's very, very expensive, like everyone has told you this morning, Kirk and Jimmy. And so it went to heroin. So he was then smoking heroin. And it was very, very intense cravings. Why are some people more vulnerable to addiction? It's basically genetic predisposition, adverse childhood experiences, developmental. Maybe you experienced it, or you saw someone experiencing substance use disorder growing up, your mom or dad. Chronic pain can make you more vulnerable, and then dual diagnosis. Maybe you have some bipolar disorder or schizophrenia, depression, some other mental health disorder. So how can we reduce the stigma? Basically just becoming aware of it, confronting it, and having a conversation about it. When we see addiction and substance use disorder as a disease, and knowing that the person can't control it, then we can begin to think about it differently. We can think about it differently, we can talk about it differently, and we can see the person struggling as a person and not that addict. We can show empathy and compassion. Treat them like any other person you would treat them. Get to know them. Treat them with worth and respect. And then the language we use matters. And this is important to me. I like to teach people that I work with. I do this at Blue Cross with our customer service. I'm very proud to be able to share this PowerPoint and with the people that I work with, so that maybe the people on the front lines at Blue Cross can have more empathy with family members that call in or someone that's struggling. But as healthcare workers, I think it's very important for us to think about the language that we use. So first person language, we use person with an opioid use disorder, not an opioid addict or a junkie. Opioid addict is stigmatizing. It's really a person who has this opioid use disorder. It puts an emphasis on the worth of the individual themselves, not the disease. And it treats the disease as it is, as a medical problem with a medical solution. Non-stigmatizing language, a person with a substance use disorder. My son wasn't an addict. He was a person. He was a person with an opioid use disorder. We can use terms like use and misuse rather than abuse. We can say a person in recovery rather than he's clean. Jimmy has long-term sustained recovery. That's some new language, but that's a much less stigmatizing language than saying he's being clean. Also with urine drug screens, we say, oh, he had a clean drug screen or he had a dirty drug screen. These people already feel dirty enough. We can say positive or negative. We don't say they had a clean red blood cell level or a clean blood glucose level. So positive and negative. Just simple, very, very simple things to think about as we're talking to people about this disease. And then stigma kills. Why do I think stigma kills? Well, research shows that basically it affects the willingness to seek treatment. If people are thinking of you as an addict and that you can control it and you should just stop, why would you want to go and tell them you have a problem? You don't want to tell your mom so that she can take you to get help. You don't want to tell your doctor when you go in for a sinus infection that, you really have been taking opiates and you find yourself in trouble. You're not going to tell them because you feel bad. You feel shame. It affects people's willingness to seek treatment. It affects their success in treatment and recovery. And see, no treatment can mean death. And that's the case in my son's case. Yeah, medication-assisted recovery, medication-assisted treatment. I mentioned to you earlier that my son tried medication-assisted treatment. I want to talk to you a little bit about that. Who all knows what medication-assisted treatment is? Okay, good. I always like to know that, ask that, because there are a lot of people that still don't know what it is. There's a lot of people who think negatively of it. Medication-assisted treatment has a big black mark on it. There's as much stigma surrounding MAT or MAR as there is the disease itself. Medication-assisted treatment is a medication, when combined with counseling and behavioral therapy, has been proven to reduce cravings, opioid use, and overdose, and it improves the long-term outcomes. There are studies that have proven this. It's evidence-based practice. People say, though, it's trading one drug for another. The drug's actually buprenorphine. You may hear Suboxone, naltrexone, Vivitrol. They come in little sublingual films, and so that you let them dissolve under your tongue. You can do that on your own. And it also comes in an injection. It's a long-term injection that you would get by your healthcare provider. But when used with counseling, 12-step programs, it has been proven to reduce overdose. Why would we not use this? My son came to me after he had relapsed at one point and said he wanted to try medication-assisted treatment. And I knew about Dr. Mancino's program at UAMS. I had looked into it. I had studied MAT, and when he asked me if he wanted, if he could do this, he was 18. I couldn't really stop him, but I told him I would support him if he really wanted to do this, if he went to a good program that had the counseling along with it, because I knew that was very important. And then the accountability with regular drug testing and checking in. And so I told him that I would support him in that. He did start the treatment program. He was doing very well. He was actually talking about his future. He would come home and we would sit around and have the best time watching TV, watching movies, having regular conversations. I had my son back. It was that smiling, happy person. He was taking his medication-assisted treatment, the Suboxone. He was not having cravings. He was going to his counselor. He was actually able to listen to his counselor and get help from him. He would give me feedback for the first time ever from his counselor. He had been to counselors since probably 16 years old in an attempt to try to get some help. But at this time, he was actually engaging with his counselor that he would see a couple of times a week. But he started thinking about his future, and he wanted to be a farmer. I come from a family that farms, and I grew up on a farm. He has always had it in his blood. He always had the little tractors when he was a kid. He always wanted to work outside. He could get in those big tractors and drive and knew exactly what to do, and that's what he wanted to do. And he was doing better, and he started thinking about his future, and he wanted to go farm down in southeast Arkansas. We were in Little Rock, where his treatment was. At the same time, someone said, "Hey man, you don't need to be on that stuff. You're not a junkie out on the streets. You can just do what I did. I went to 12-step, I quit. You don't need to be taking that stuff because, see, you're going to be on the rest of your life if you do." He told me this. And I couldn't really do anything after someone had already changed his mind about it. You see, negative talk matters, stigma matters, and that's another thing. Stigma about treatment matters. It changed his mind. Then I also got the same stigma. Why are you letting him try that? Why are you letting him do that? Well, I mean, I don't get it now looking back. Why not? Why not let him? But it started to affect the way I thought. As a nurse and a researcher, and someone who had looked into the treatment. I was like, well, maybe I'm just being silly because it's my child, and maybe I shouldn't be supporting him in this, and maybe I should just step back and not say anything at this point. He was 18. He was able to do what he wanted to do at that point anyway, continue treatment or not. But he said, I'm doing really good. I'm almost weaned off. I think I'll just go ahead and wean myself off, go down there and start working, and I'll be fine. And I knew I'll be fine was not the case. I knew weaning himself off, and I told him, you're going to be right back. I'm afraid. And that's what happened. He did relapse. He overdosed a couple of times. He went to treatment at a residential treatment center in Louisiana. After that, on a couple of occasions, he finished one. He would get out, doing well, working again, living in a chem-free house, doing everything normal, and he relapsed. He did that a couple of times until he finally relapsed, and it was a fatal relapse, and he didn't make it. So what if I could what if and if only all of this situation to death? When Parker passed away, he was put on a respirator. The EMS got him before, and they put him on a ventilator. I found him at the ER on a ventilator. And then I just knew that he was not going to make it this time. And as watching him lay there in the bed, I made a choice to accept what I was given. I made a choice to accept what God had given me. Parker called me at one point while he was in treatment and said, Mom, I think God's calling me to go and talk to the people at Robinson High School and warn them. He wanted to go warn the kids about the dangers because nobody had warned him. And he said, I also wanted to tell them there's hope and there's help. And so I said, yes, I will go with you and we'll do it. And he said, but I gotta do more than 2 months. I can't go and say I've been 2 months clean. I said, well, yeah, you can. And he's like, no, I need to get better. And when I get better, we're going to go out. And so I was planning on, because that was a passion of his, to go out and speak and warn kids. And so when I knew that he wasn't going to make it, I vowed to accept what I had been given, and with gratitude. And so I thank God for all of the good things. I thank God for letting him be a parent, me be a parent to him for 20 years. I thank him for letting me be there at his bedside rather than seeing him in a morgue. And now I thank God for the opportunity for letting me go and use his story to help people. But what if? So I always want to know, what could we do differently? What if there was no stigma? Would it have made a difference? Would it have saved his life? I don't know. But I think it's something that we all need to look at. And that's what I want everyone, when I go and speak, to think about. What if there's no stigma? Would people seek treatment more? Would they seek treatment sooner so they don't get to the place where they're at heroin? I think it would make a difference, and I think we need to keep working on that as a state. What if medication-assisted recovery or medication-assisted treatment was more readily available in rural areas? And that map that was up there, what if it was available and more available in all areas? We have done a lot of work increasing the availability of providers, but we got a lot of work left to do. What if it was offered in the ER? When Parker went to the ER, what if medication-assisted treatment was offered to him? Okay, so what if when he overdosed in the ER, the nurse didn't just hand him a prescription of Narcan and said, hey, you better go get this filled because you're going to need it, because that's what happened. He came home and he felt so bad because that's what they told him. I'll tell you that made him feel horrible. It didn't help him. What if they had said, you know what, I've got a peer recovery support specialist who's been through this. He's going to walk through it with you. And oh, by the way, we can start you on Suboxone right now. And then we're going to set you up with an appointment with this doctor tomorrow. And hey, you've got this person who's a peer and they're going to walk alongside you. Would that have made a difference? I don't know, but I think it's something we need to think about, because I think it would make a difference for somebody. And that's what I'm about, making a difference and saving a life for somebody else. What if medication-assisted treatment was started in the residential treatment program he was in? What if, while he was in his counseling and he was working his 12 steps, I mean, that's where he started first working through the abuse that he had went through. He had never told me about this. He had never told anybody about this. But while he was in the residential treatment program, he had been there long enough. They finally got him to the point where he could admit it and get some counseling, and he was able to start dealing with that. And then it was time for him to go home and live in a recovery center, a recovery home, chem-free home. What if they had started him on Suboxone so that when he had gone through this, then he went to his chem-free house, he was on Suboxone so he could deal with those cravings that he was having, but continue his intensive outpatient treatment and his 12-step. Would that have made a difference? I don't know, but I think it's something that we need to think about. I will say that we have peer recovery specialists now in the ERs at UAMS. And we've got St. Vincent's has some on call as well. So our state is doing amazing things. Thank you, Arkansas, for Joe Martin, your department, Kirk Lane, and his all of his people, and all that we're doing in the state. Because some of these things, the check marks are happening. It's happening. We've got work left to do, though, I believe. So now what? Or what now? Now what? What now? Whatever. What are we going to do when we leave here today? And that's what I think is important for each one of us to think about. We all have something that we can do in our own circle of influence. We have different backgrounds. We have different passions. We have different circles. There's things that we can do in our churches. There's things that we can do in our jobs, in our school. Everywhere we go, what is it that you can do? And that's what I'd like you all to think about. And I want to thank you for thinking about it. I want to thank you all for setting this up, because this is something that y'all did do, and I appreciate it, because the more we talk about it, the more we think about it, the more work is going to be done, and I think people will be saved because we are all coming together as a state. We've got to. People are dying. Good people are dying. They're suffering, and we've got to do something. So thank you very much. There was the what now? I missed it. But anyway, I do believe that the person struggling with substance use disorder is worth us trying our best to do what we can do to make sure they're treated like people, and to make sure that they have available to them the most effective treatment without stigma or judgment attached. So thank you very much. I want to thank you for letting me be the voice for this little cowboy and for countless others that have already been lost in the state of Arkansas and across the country. So thank you very much. I'm going to go back and leave you my email address if you want to get in touch with me. Thank y'all very much. I told you I'm not near as exciting, as fun as Jimmy, but it's an important message anyway. Thank you.
Inspiration and hope and courage. Just courage coming from you. And I can't imagine what you've been through, but you're helping us to, you're speaking to people who have an interest in doing this for their future, for their careers.
I know.
And so
thank you. I'm super excited about that.
And that's exciting. And you've given us a face and a human being to go out and to remember when you're working in all kinds of areas. So with that,
thank you. Thank you very much.